Four ruthless thugs pick the wrong man to bully, Mike Tyson. Insults fly, fists land, and within seconds, chaos erupts. You won't believe what happens next. The neon glow of Shinjuku's Kabukicho district pulsed like the heartbeat of Tokyo's dark underbelly. The electric signs flickered overhead, a chaotic dance of crimson and sapphire lights reflecting off the rain-slicked pavement. The hum of nightlife buzzed through the streets. Drunken businessmen stumbled from karaoke bars. Street performers drummed up a crowd, and the scent of sizzling yakitori drifted from food stalls, mingling with the city's ever-present smog. At the far end of an alley, just beyond the reach of flickering lanterns, Mike Tyson sat at a small, weathered food stand, enjoying a simple meal of teriyaki beef skewers, rice, and miso soup. The former heavyweight champion, now preferring solitude over spectacle, ate in silence. His broad shoulders were draped in a simple black hoodie, his presence a stark contrast to the chaotic life of Kabukicho. He had spent years in arenas surrounded by screaming fans, but here, in the dim corner of the Tokyo underworld, he was just another man looking for peace. But peace was a fragile thing, and some men had a knack for shattering it. A gang of 4 Eastern European thugs staggered down the alleyway, laughing and swearing in drunken bravado. Their leader, Dmitri, a towering brute with a face weathered by countless street fights, walked with the arrogant strut of a man who had never met a real challenge. His men, Boris, Mikhail, and Vadim, followed like hungry jackals, eyes scanning the streets for an easy target. They weren't here to sightsee, they were predators. Then they saw Mike. Dmitri's bloodshot eyes locked onto the lone figure at the food stall, a foreigner sitting quietly, minding his own business. To them, he was an outsider, a stranger in their territory. "Look at this one," Dmitri sneered, nudging Boris. "Sitting there like a king, probably thinks he's better than us." Boris chuckled, his thick fingers wrapped around the neck of a half-empty bottle of vodka. "Americans, always acting tough? Bet he can't even throw a punch." Their laughter filled the alley as they stalked toward Mike's table, their presence an unsettling ripple in the otherwise flowing rhythm of the night. Mike heard them, of course. He felt them before he saw them. Years of instinct honed through. Battle told him everything he needed to know. 4 men, drunk, overconfident, looking for trouble. But he didn't react. He took another bite of his beef skewer, chewing slowly, his hands steady. He had no interest in a fight, but the fight was interested in him. Dmitri leaned against the food stall, his foul breath polluting the air. His voice dripped with mockery. "Hey, big guy, you lost? Or just too scared to sit inside with the real men?" Mike said nothing. Mikhail grabbed a stool and plopped himself down across from Mike, uninvited. He reached over and snatched one of the skewers from Mike's plate, biting into it with exaggerated pleasure. "Not bad," he smirked, mouth full. "Thanks for dinner, champ." The others laughed. Mike exhaled slowly, setting down his chopsticks with practiced patience. Dmitri wasn't satisfied. He wanted a reaction. He needed to feel superior. He reached for Mike's bowl of rice, but he didn't just take it. He lifted the steaming bowl and dumped it over Mike's chest, the warm grains sticking to his hoodie. The alley went silent. The laughter died. The air thickened, the tension hanging like an executioner's blade. What Dmitri and his men didn't realize was that they had just provoked the world's most dangerous man. Mike didn't lunge. He didn't shout. He simply looked up. His gaze, dark and unwavering, locked onto Dmitri like a predator locking onto prey. For the first time that night, Dmitri felt something he wasn't used to feeling: fear. He had made a mistake, a grave, irreversible mistake. But by the time he realized it, it was already too late. The neon lights of Kabukicho flickered erratically, the humid Tokyo air buzzing with life as the alley grew unnaturally silent. The once rowdy laughter of Dmitri and his gang now felt forced, strained against the electric tension that crackled between them and Mike Tyson. Mike sat still, his frame relaxed, his breath even. But beneath the surface, the beast stirred. Dmitri, eyes sharp with malice, loomed closer, his fingers tapping lazily against the table as if he were sizing up an insect beneath his boot. He was enjoying this. "You deaf old man," Dmitri sneered, his thick Eastern European accent coiling around every word. "Or just scared." Mike's gaze slowly lifted from his meal. His eyes, dark as storm clouds, met Dmitri's. A warning. Subtle, but unmistakable. But Dmitri wasn't one for warnings. Behind him, Mikhail and Boris positioned themselves, cutting off any possible retreat. Vadim, ever the brute, grabbed a chair from a nearby table and spun it backward, straddling it with all the arrogance of a king who believed himself untouchable. "You don't talk much," Boris chuckled, nudging Mikhail. "Maybe he's slow?" Laughter erupted from the group, a grating, jagged sound that echoed off the alley walls. A few passers-by paused, sensing the imbalance in the air, the kind that only came before violence, but no one stepped in. This was kabukicho. People knew better than to interfere. Mike exhaled through his nose, calm, controlled. "You boys got nothing better to do?" he said finally, voice even, steady. Dmitri smirked, dragging his fingers along Mike's plate before plucking a piece of teriyaki beef from the skewer. He chewed loudly, deliberately, his grin widening. "Not bad," Dmitri said, mimicking Mike's earlier stillness, "but I prefer my meals with a little excitement." Mike's jaw tensed. The others caught on, their taunts growing bolder. Vadim reached over, grabbing another skewer. "Think he's a fighter?" Mikhail jeered, elbowing Boris. "Looks soft to me." Boris smirked. "Let's find out." And then, in one swift motion, Dmitri lifted Mike's bowl of miso soup and dumped it over his chest. The warm broth soaked into his hoodie, dripping down his chest, the sharp scent of soy and seaweed filling the air. The food stand owner gasped audibly, backing away as he sensed what was about to unfold. For a split second, the world stopped. Dmitri grinned, reveling in his moment of power. He turned to his crew, expecting their laughter. But no one was laughing, because Mike Tyson had finally moved. It was a simple motion, just the tightening of fingers, a slow clench of the fist resting on the table. But it was enough. Vadim, still chewing, suddenly forgot how to swallow. Mikhail and Boris exchanged uncertain glances. The predatory confidence that had dripped from Dmitri's every movement began to evaporate like mist under the heat of a rising sun. Mike stood, not in a rush, not in anger, but like a storm rolling in, slow, inevitable, unstoppable. The chair scraped against the pavement as he rose to his full height. Though Dmitri was taller, broader, it no longer mattered. Something primal, something deep, evolutionary, shifted in the atmosphere, a feeling that sent a chill through even the most hardened men. Dmitri swallowed, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. He tried to reassert control, jabbing a finger into Mike's chest. "That's all you got?" he taunted. "You're just going to stand there, tough guy? Do something." Mike tilted his head, eyes never leaving Dmitri's. "You sure about that?" The words weren't a threat. They were a final warning. Dmitri scoffed. "Yeah, I'm sure, Grandpa. What are you gonna do?" Mike's fist moved before anyone saw it coming, a blur of speed, inhuman, impossible, like a lightning strike tearing through the air. His knuckles smashed into Dmitri's solar plexus with the force of a wrecking ball. Bone, muscle, and pride shattered in an instant. Dmitri's breath vanished, his face contorted in shock, his body folding like a broken chair. The laughter was gone, replaced by silence. The sound of Dmitri gasping, choking for air, was the only noise in the alley. He collapsed onto his knees, eyes bulging, veins popping in his forehead as his lungs fought to reclaim the breath that had been ripped from him. He had never been hit like that. Boris and Mikhail stumbled back, their bravado evaporating into raw panic. Vadim, the fool, lunged. Big mistake. Mike moved again, fluid, devastating. His elbow shot up, smashing into Vadim's nose with a sickening crack. Blood splattered against the pavement. Vadim reeled backward, eyes rolling, body swaying, then collapsed onto the cold concrete. The neon lights above flickered as if the city itself had flinched. Mike turned to the remaining two, his knuckles still dripping with the heat of impact. Mikhail's mouth opened, but no words came. Boris's hands trembled at his sides. Dmitri, still gasping on the ground, could only wheeze in horror. Mike exhaled, rolling his shoulders. "Now," he said, voice calm as ever. "You sure you want to do this?" Mikhail and Boris ran. Dmitri, still wheezing, tried to crawl away. Mike crouched next to him. "Next time," he said, voice quiet, "pick someone else." Dmitri shuddered. And as Mike Tyson stood and walked back to his seat, picking up a fresh skewer as if nothing had happened, the alley was left in silence. A silence louder than any scream. The neon glow of Kabukicho's backstreets pulsed like a heartbeat, its alleyways filled with shadows that whispered promises of violence. The air was thick, humid, charged with an almost electric tension. A storm was brewing. Mike Tyson stood tall, his face unreadable, a living monument of restrained fury. Across from him, Dmitri, Boris, and Mikhail surrounded him like wolves encircling prey. But this wasn't prey. This was the apex predator. On the ground, Vadim writhed, clutching his shattered wrist, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The sickening crack of bone still echoed in the minds of his crew, their bravado thinning, their drunken arrogance giving way to something colder. Fear. Mike's voice was calm, low, deadly. "Let's try that again." Dmitri's eyes burned with humiliation. This was his turf, his rules. He couldn't afford to let this man, this foreigner, humiliate him in front of his own. His hand twitched toward his jacket, fingers curling around the handle of a folding knife. "You got a problem, old man?" Dmitri spat, his breath thick with alcohol and rage. "You mess with one of us, you mess with all of us." Mike exhaled through his nose, a slow, measured breath. Boris and Mikhail spread out, their movements deliberate. Their hands, once relaxed, now hovered near their belts where knives and brass knuckles lurked in the shadows. The alley had become a hunting ground, only they weren't the hunters anymore. The crowd, once immersed in their own nightly vices, had stopped. Eyes peered from behind noodle stands, bar doorways, and alley corners. The Tokyo underworld thrived on bloodshed, and they could smell it in the air. Mike's grip tightened ever so slightly. Oleg, still curled on the ground, whimpered like a wounded dog. The fight had drained from him, replaced by the sharp realization that he had picked the wrong man to antagonize. Dmitri saw the fear in his fallen comrade's eyes. It only fueled his anger. "You think you can do that to my man and just walk away?" Dmitri growled, taking a step forward. "You think you scare me?" Mike tilted his head slightly. "Yeah." That one word, spoken with quiet certainty, was more terrifying than any shouted threat. And yet Dmitri refused to believe it. His pride wouldn't allow it. His pride was about to get him hurt. Boris, the biggest of the group, moved first, his hand darting toward a blade tucked inside his coat. But before steel could even glint in the neon lights, Mike moved, faster than thought. His fist rocketed forward with the force of a cannon, burying itself deep in Boris's gut. The impact sounded like a gunshot. Boris's body froze, his face contorted, the air ripped from his lungs in a choked, silent scream. His knees buckled, and for one terrifying moment he hung there, suspended in pain, before crumpling onto the pavement in a heap. The spectators gasped in unison. Boris didn't move. Mikhail hesitated. His bravado fractured. This wasn't supposed to happen. Dmitri, blinded by rage, let out a guttural snarl and lunged forward, knife flashing. Mike barely shifted, just enough. The blade missed by inches, cutting through nothing but empty space. Dmitri's eyes widened in realization. He had overextended. That was all Mike needed. He pivoted, using Dmitri's own momentum against him, and drove his elbow into the Russian's jaw. The crack of impact rang through the alley like a judge's gavel. Dmitri's head snapped sideways, his entire body whipping through the air before crashing against the alley wall. He slid down slowly, his fingers twitching, eyes glassy. The crowd erupted. Some shouted in excitement. Others, knowing the brutality of Tokyo's criminal world, grabbed their phones, not to record, but to send warnings. Mikhail, the last one standing, froze. His breathing quickened, his mind scrambling for an escape. He looked at Boris, still motionless, Vadim, a shaking mess clutching his wrist, and Dmitri, knocked senseless against the wall, his throat bobbed. "You don't want to do this," Mike said, his voice even. Mikhail didn't. Without a word, he turned and ran. A moment of stillness settled over the scene. Mike rolled his shoulders, shaking the tension from his fists. He wasn't even out of breath. He bent down slightly, looking at Dmitri's barely conscious face. "You should have let me eat my dinner," Mike murmured. Dmitri tried to speak, but only blood and broken pride spilled from his lips. Mike took one final glance at the mess around him, then turned back toward his food stall. He sat down, picked up a new skewer, and took a bite. The world hadn't moved on yet. People still stared, the weight of what they had just witnessed settling into their bones. Then, in the distance, sirens. Someone had called the cops. Mike sighed, sipping his miso soup. Here we go again. The air in Kabukicho's back alley was thick with tension, the neon lights flickering like a pulse beating just beneath the city's skin. The silence that followed Mike Tyson's brutal counterattack was deafening, as if the world itself had stopped to witness what came next. Dmitri, clutching his shattered ribs, wheezed, his breath shallow and broken. His once fearless crew, Vadim, Boris, and Mikhail, stood frozen in place, their confidence shattered like glass beneath the crushing weight of real fear. The crowd edged closer, their hushed murmurs a low electric buzz against the backdrop of city noise. They had seen fights before, but not like this. Not where one man dismantled an entire crew with nothing but his hands. Dmitri, eyes wild with pain and humiliation, spat onto the pavement, the red smear of blood pooling at his feet. His pride wouldn't let him back down. "You think this is over?" he growled, forcing himself upright, his ribs screaming in protest. Mike didn't even blink. Boris and Mikhail exchanged glances, their hands tightening around the knives hidden in their jackets. It was a final, desperate move. Mikhail, fueled by a toxic cocktail of fear and bravado, lunged first. The flash of steel caught the neon light as he swung the blade in a wide arc, aiming for Mike's throat. But Mike had seen every kind of attack imaginable. He sidestepped effortlessly, his body moving like liquid shadow. Mikhail's momentum betrayed him. He was wide open. Mike struck, fast, lethal. His fist crashed into Mikhail's forearm, smashing against the nerves just below the elbow. The knife flew from his grasp, clattering against the pavement. Mikhail barely had time to register his mistake before Mike Tyson's fist met his jaw. The sound of bone meeting bone was sickening. Mikhail's head snapped backward. His legs gave out before his body even realized what happened. He crumpled, unconscious, before he even hit the pavement. The crowd roared, a mix of shock, excitement, and raw adrenaline-fueled awe. Boris, seeing his comrade folded like a cheap chair, took a step back. His hands trembled. His pulse thundered in his ears. Mike turned his gaze toward him, steady, calculated, deadly. "You sure about this?" Mike asked, his voice calm as ever. For the first time that night, Boris hesitated. Vadim, still cradling his broken wrist, shook his head violently. "Forget it, Boris. We need to go." Dmitri wasn't done. His fingers wrapped around his jacket's hidden pocket, his breath ragged but seething with rage. "You think you can just walk away?" he snarled. His last card was in play. With a trembling but determined hand, Dmitri pulled a small switchblade from his pocket, flicking the blade open with a metallic snap. He lunged, desperate. Mike didn't move until the last second. Then, like lightning splitting the sky, he struck. A brutal sidestep, a flash of movement too fast for the eye to follow, then an impact like thunder. Mike's forearm collided with Dmitri's wrist, knocking the knife away. Before Dmitri could react, Mike's fist rocketed forward. Crack! A devastating uppercut met Dmitri's chin. The force lifted him off his feet. For a split second, time stood still. Dmitri hovered in the air, gravity defying his fall. Then, he crashed back to earth, a lifeless heap of regret and broken pride. The crowd erupted, a frenzy of voices, cheers, whispers of disbelief. No one had ever seen something like this. Boris, seeing Dmitri sprawled unconscious at Mike's feet, made his decision. He ran, fast. Vadim stumbled after him, dragging Mikhail's limp body in a frantic attempt to flee. Mike stood over the wreckage. Dmitri's body lay motionless. His chest still rose and fell, but barely. The fight was over. Mike exhaled, rolling his shoulders. The roar of police sirens cut through the night. Someone had called them. The crowd began to scatter, knowing the cops wouldn't care about fairness. Mike turned back toward his half-eaten meal, picking up his bowl of rice, as if nothing had happened. He took a bite, chewed, sighed. "Didn't even get to finish my damn food," he muttered. As the flashing blue lights bathed the alley in their glow, Mike Tyson sat and waited. Because for him, this wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. The neon glow of Kabukicho's alley bathed the wreckage in flickering colors. The scene was chaos incarnate, bodies sprawled, groans of pain echoing against damp concrete, the smell of sweat, blood, and fried food still lingering in the night air. Mike Tyson stood at the center of it all, unmoved. Dmitri's body lay crumpled across the hood of a shattered car, his breath shallow, his ribs struggling against the pain of Mike's unstoppable fury. Boris and Mikhail, still dazed, limped away like beaten dogs. Vadim sat slumped against a dumpster, still clutching his twisted wrist, too stunned to move. The crowd, no longer mere spectators, had transformed into a riot of voices. Some cheering, some whispering in disbelief, and others clutching their phones, recording the moment that would no doubt go viral by sunrise. But amidst the noise, a new sound emerged. Sirens, a distant wail growing louder. Tokyo's underworld was lawless, but only to a point. The authorities had limits, and Mike had just shattered them. Mike exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders as he turned to face the approaching squad cars. From the main street, black uniformed officers flooded the alleyway, their boots slapping against the pavement in synchronized force. Red and blue lights splashed against the walls, flashing like an ominous warning. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police had arrived. "Hands where we can see them!" a voice barked in Japanese. Mike didn't flinch. The officers fanned out, weapons drawn, barking orders. But even among law enforcement, there was hesitation. They had seen the scene before them, a battlefield where only one man still stood tall. Dmitri, bloodied but not unconscious, forced a smirk, groaning as he tried to shift his battered body. "Arrest him," he coughed, nodding toward Mike. He attacked us, unprovoked." Mike's jaw tightened. He had seen men like this before. Weak men who bullied the innocent only to crumble when they found themselves outmatched. And when they lost, they cried for the law. A younger officer hesitated, looking at the battered gang members, then at the calm, unscathed legend standing before them. A superior, his uniform crisp, stepped forward. "Is this true?" he asked in English. Mike shrugged, his voice even, unbothered. They started it. Dmitri, still trying to save face, coughed out a laugh. You expect them to believe that? Look at us. Look at you. Mike sighed. Yeah, that's kind of the problem, isn't it? A murmur ran through the crowd. They had seen everything. The moment Dmitri's crew had made their move, the moment they had tried to flex their power on the wrong man, and they weren't about to let the police rewrite the story. A bystander stepped forward, an older Japanese man in a business suit, his tie loosened, his phone still recording. I saw everything, he said firmly in Japanese. That man, he pointed at Mike, was eating his dinner. They attacked him first. Another voice chimed in, a young woman in a leather jacket, her phone still streaming live. They were harassing him for no reason, she added, eyes flashing in defiance. They dumped his food on him, and when he defended himself, they pulled knives. A murmur rippled through the police ranks. More voices joined in. He was outnumbered. They had weapons. He barely even fought back. He just ended it. The officers exchanged uncertain glances. This wasn't some underground Yakuza brawl. It was a public incident, captured on every phone in sight. Dmitri's cocky smirk faltered. He had counted on the police siding with him, but now, with dozens of witnesses contradicting his lie, his chances were slipping away fast. The commanding officer studied Mike for a moment, measuring him. Then, with a sigh, he turned to Dmitri and his gang. Get them out of here, he ordered in Japanese. Dmitri's eyes widened. What? No. I said get them out of here. The officer's voice was steel. This is Tokyo, not a back-alley street fight in Moscow. You don't come into our city, pick fights, and expect protection. The officers moved in, dragging Dmitri and his crew to their feet. Boris and Mikhail didn't even resist. Vadim groaned as they hauled him up, his broken wrist hanging limp. Dmitri, however, still had one last ounce of defiance. This isn't over, he spat at Mike, his voice venomous. You'll regret this. Mike stared at him for a long moment. Then, with deliberate calm, he reached over to the food stand's counter, picked up a fresh skewer of teriyaki beef, and took a bite, chewed, swallowed, and then he grinned. I already forgot about you. The words landed harder than any punch. Dmitri's face burned with humiliation. As the officers shoved him toward the squad cars, the crowd erupted in laughter. Mike stretched his arms, cracking his neck as he turned back to his meal, his hunger finally returning now that the nonsense had been handled. One of the officers, the younger one, lingered for a moment. I know who you are, he said in English. Mike raised an eyebrow. Yeah? The officer gave a small, knowing smirk. You're lucky the cameras were rolling. Mike grinned back. Yeah, they usually are. The officer nodded, then followed his team toward the waiting squad cars. The crowd began to disperse, the excitement dying down. The alley, once a battleground, returned to normal. Mike took another bite. Finally, his meal was quiet again. For now. The neon haze of Kabukicho pulsed as the Tokyo police loaded Dmitri and his gang into their squad cars. The air was thick with adrenaline, the crowd still murmuring in stunned awe. Mike Tyson sat back down, unshaken, picking up his coffee like the fight had never happened. The bitter brew contrasted the lingering metallic taste of battle. Dmitri, bruised and broken, locked eyes with Mike one last time, seething. Mike smirked, taking a slow sip. Next time, he said, voice smooth as steel. Know who you're messing with. Dmitri was hauled away. Mike? He finished his meal. Mike Tyson's story teaches a powerful lesson about respect, restraint, and the dangers of underestimating others. In today's world, prejudice and bullying still exist, often fueled by arrogance and ignorance. Those who seek to dominate others through intimidation will eventually face consequences. True strength isn't about aggression. It's about knowing when to fight and when to walk away. We must learn to treat people with dignity, judge them by their character, not appearance, and never assume superiority over others. In life, as in battle, wisdom and respect will always outlast brute force. Choose integrity over conflict whenever possible. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe Undercover Insights channel.